As fun and quippy as the MCU can be, the franchise does love to twist the knife in us harder than Loki did to Phil Coulson. So what's been the saddest death so far? Today's video is going to be ranking the top 10 hero deaths in the MCU. The top ones you probably cried over, so grab your tissue boxes right now as we go in depth about what made each death so impactful and why it was so important to the MCU overall. What are we waiting for? Let's begin. At the bottom of this list is Quicksilver, who stands as the first major superpowered Avenger death in the MCU. We kind of expected something along these lines. Going into Age of Ultron, Joss Whedon hyped up just how much darker this movie was going to be than the original. And given his love of killing off beloved characters, it wasn't hard to predict that someone was going to bite the dust. But the movie gave us a bit of a twist. After heavy foreshadowing that Hawkeye was going to be the one who permanently retires to the farm, if you know what I mean, the movie delivered a curveball and actually had Quicksilver meet his demise instead.
You didn't see that coming.
It's a nice scene. After the whole movie of trying to one-up each other, Quicksilver sacrifices himself to save Hawkeye and a civilian. But it's at the bottom because we just didn't spend enough time with his character to really be that broken up. Plus, the Quicksilver they had just introduced in the X-Men franchise was amazing, so really no one was crying that hard over the MCU's Quicksilver. Well, except for Scarlet Witch. Man, Wanda just can't catch a break ever. If we're talking about first major deaths in the MCU that hit us hard, we have to mention Phil Coulson. The agent who started off annoying Tony Stark quickly grew into a fan favorite throughout Phase 1 of the MCU. So, of course, Joss Whedon had to kill him off in the first Avengers movie to really drive home how awful Loki was. But his death was necessary in uniting the Avengers, and it also showed just how manipulative Nick Fury could really be. Yes, Coulson died tragically, but Fury then manipulated his death to guilt the Avengers even more by using some bloody trading cards to really sell it. But overall, this scene is great, and by great, I mean great in that really sad way. Watching Loki stab that spear in Coulson's back was gasp-worthy and definitely memorable. Though this death is hard to really judge because big fans of the MCU know that Coulson came back alive and well for the spin-off show Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., something that wasn't really acknowledged by the movies. But if you don't watch the show, which you definitely should watch, then you were probably happy to see Coulson pop back up in the Captain Marvel movie as a younger version of himself. Yondu had one of the best character redemption stories in the MCU.
I'm Mary Poppins, y'all!
In the first Guardians of the Galaxy, he was just a secondary antagonist who caused problems for Peter and kept mentioning how they were kind not to eat him as a boy. You know, standard villain talk. But the sequel gave the character much more depth. We learned that he was kicked out of the Ravagers for dealing in kids, and then learned he had a change of heart once he met Peter. But by then, he was on his own, and he raised Peter to the man he is today. Sure, he also used him for heists and jobs, but hey, no one's perfect. Which is why his death is so sad. We're definitely entering tissue box range here. After Peter has a horrible experience with his birth father, Peter's adoptive father, Yondu, not only swoops down and saves him, but sacrifices his life to make sure Peter survived. Man, he is truly Mary Poppins. And even though his death was sad, it paved the way for his awesome funeral scene, where his old comrades showed up to pay their respects. It was a great send-off for a great character. Even after knowing what's going to happen, Gamora's death scene is hard to watch. We get the setup from the exposition ghost, known as Red Skull, that you need to sacrifice someone you love for the stone. We see Gamora absolutely light up because she doesn't believe Thanos loves anything and laughs in his face. We see the laughter turn to horror as she realizes what's going to happen, and we the audience can't look away as the Mad Titan makes his sacrifice in order to get what he wants. This scene is heartbreaking, but it's also ranked here just because we as the audience don't know how to feel in that moment. Come on, even though this was a shocking moment, did anyone think Gamora was truly dead?
Gamora?
She's too important to the Guardians of the Galaxy and has so much more story to tell that it just seemed unbelievable she would stay dead. I thought she'd be back by the end of the movie to tell Star-Lord how he'd let himself go a little bit. Sadly, that wasn't the case. Vision holds the honor of being the only MCU Avenger who's actually died twice. The MCU hasn't really been that kind to Vision since his debut. He's supposed to be one of the most powerful Avengers, but his history after helping defeat Ultron has been a little dark. He paralyzed Rhodey in the Civil War battle, and then he was injured right at the start of Infinity War, which stopped him from using a lot of his most powerful abilities. And even after everyone tried to save his life, it ended with him telling the woman he loved to kill him, which she agreed to do. And already that was a sad, emotional scene, but the real sting comes just a few moments later when Thanos uses the Time Stone to bring Vision back to life just so he could rip the Mind Stone out of the android's head. I wonder what was more painful, Scarlet Witch shattering the Mind Stone or Thanos yanking it out of Vision's forehead. Both sound awful, and the end result is Thanos completing his goal of getting all the Infinity Stones. Before the first Guardians of the Galaxy was released, if you told me that a giant Vin Diesel sounding tree who could only say 3 words would become the emotional heart of an MCU movie, I would have called you crazier than the Grandmaster and the Collector put together. But it's true, Groot was the heart and soul of that first movie, even if his speech was limited. And when it came down to it, Groot knew what was important in life. As Ronin's ship plummets towards Xandar, Groot surrounds his friends in a beautiful cocoon in order to keep them safe. But as Rocket points out, this will kill Groot in the process. Then Groot tugs at our heartstrings when he tells Rocket, "We are Groot." And the rest is history. The music and the framing of that scene is incredible and really should turn any emotionless audience member into a blubbering mess. If that wasn't enough, we then have to see Rocket mourn his only friend and Drax comforts him. The only really positive thing about this is that it leads the way to Baby Groot. Loki's actual death was a big game changer and really set the stage for the rest of Infinity War. And as a way to start off a movie, it's incredible. But also, his death is really tragic knowing how far the character has come. If Loki actually died in the first Avengers movie, we would be sad to see such a charismatic villain go, but we wouldn't be that heartbroken about it. But Loki had come a long way since then. Thor Ragnarok saw Loki undergo a dramatic character shift, and by the end, he and Thor had started to repair their fractured relationship. And it was such a heartwarming moment to hear Loki say he wants to stick with Thor for a while. Well, then Infinity War had to happen and ruin all of it. Thanos shows up and lays waste to the Asgardians. Loki almost seems like he's going to revert back to his survival mode and side with Thanos, but he uses the opportunity to try to eliminate the Mad Titan. Of course, this doesn't go well and we have to watch Loki get the life choked out of him. An older version of Loki may be coming back in his Disney Plus television show, but the Loki who grew into a better person was killed brutally by Thanos. As we watched Black Widow and Hawkeye make their way to Vormir, I'm sure we were all shouting at the screen because we knew what was coming.
You're going the wrong way!
The only way to get the Soul Stone was to sacrifice something you loved, and knowing the deep bond Black Widow and Hawkeye shared, it was always going to be a difficult trip.
A soul for a soul.
But we could never expect the craziness that went down on Vormir, as both characters got into a full-on fight to try to throw themselves off the cliff first. In the end, it was Black Widow who won out, sacrificing herself so that Hawkeye could have a chance to see his family again. It's such a heartbreaking moment considering the history with the two of them. Black Widow was an assassin until Hawkeye got her to join S.H.I.E.L.D., and from there she grew into a true leader of the rest of the team. Her death was a huge blow in the fight against Thanos, but it was necessary in order to ultimately win. She died so that billions could live, and that's a very fitting end for any character.
I don't feel so good.
Peter Parker's death was the most impactful out of all the dusting because it felt specifically designed to tear out our hearts and stomp it into a million pieces. Everyone else who turned to dust went relatively quickly, but it's been said that Peter's spider sense and his strength allowed him to fight it off longer than most. I don't necessarily buy that and see it more as the MCU really wanting to make us cry. Everything about the scene is heartbreaking, with Tony holding on to his protege, not knowing what to do or how to help. And to hear Peter beg Tony that he doesn't want to go is tough, no matter how many times you watch it. And then add on the fact that Peter's last words are is just devastating. Peter's last thoughts are about how he thinks he failed Tony in some way and apologizes. Wow. Thankfully, Peter's death is what ultimately helps Tony agree to the final mission in Endgame, which is the only bright spot from this heart-wrenching scene. Of course, number one is Iron Man. How could it not be? When we're ranking MCU hero deaths, how could anything else but Tony's epic final sacrifice take the #1 spot? This moment is the culmination of his entire character arc. He went from an arrogant, heartless arms dealer to the universe's greatest protector over the course of the MCU. And his final, "I am Iron Man," is the perfect way to cap off his journey as he erases Thanos and his army from existence. And RDJ absolutely kills it in this scene as you see his glee, his heartbreak, his determination, his willpower, all in the matter of seconds before he snaps his fingers and defeats the evil he's been so worried about all these years. This essentially closed the book on this chapter of the MCU, which allows the franchise to rebuild and branch off in an exciting new direction. But this franchise was built on Iron Man's shoulders, and the character deserved to have an awesome send-off, because Tony's always been the face of the MCU. And thankfully, the moment was handled perfectly, and it gave us one of the best and the most heartbreaking moments, not only just in Endgame, but in the entire MCU.
I love you 3000.